Our next speaker this evening is arguably one of the foremost investigative journalists on the Syrian conflict, Vanessa Beeley, Associate Editor of 21st Century Wire. Vanessa, as I'm sure you're all aware, has travelled extensively in Syria over the last few years, risking life and limb to bring back the voices of the Syrian people from all walks of life. Again, Vanessa's award-winning work has received scant attention in mainstream media. Tonight, Vanessa will be discussing a very sophisticated propaganda construct indeed, the sacrosanct non-governmental organisation. In particular, she will talk about the once lauded and ubiquitous, though recently conspicuously absent, white helmets. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Vanessa Beeley.
Good evening. Thank you, first of all, to Frome Stop War for organising this event. Thank you to my illustrious colleagues for their contributions. I feel very humbled to be up on the stage with these people behind me. And thank you all for coming, first and foremost. Straight into Syria. No other country has endured such an intense 6 years of hysterical and dramatic, perception-nudging, headline-dependent media coverage as Syria. A coverage that has created an almost fantastical world of cartoonish villains and heroes, both equally one-dimensional and without any investigation into the complex layers that make up this conflict and its origins in neocolonialism and NATO and Gulf state hegemony, with Israel as #1 beneficiary of the destabilization of Syria in the region. One of the first cases that I'm going to look at of very clear omission is the story of Omran. A few people have mentioned him in their presentations already. We all remember Omran, the boy photographed bewildered and bloodied in the back of an ambulance in August 2016. We all remember the CNN anchor breaking down in tears over the pathos of Omran. We should also remember how this photo went viral in a matter of minutes, gracing the covers of pretty much every media outlet worldwide, the face of suffering of Aleppo, despite the fact that thousands of other Omrans in Aleppo and throughout Syria had been suffering for 6 years, with barely a mention. Omran became the face of intervention in Syria, precipitating the calls for the no-fly zone and escalated humanitarian intervention in Syria. We almost went to war over Omran, over a picture and a headline. The image of Omran won the Getty Defining Image of the Year award in 2016. When questioned over whether the photograph had been staged, Bette Lynch of Getty Images said she had complete faith in the photographer. Unfortunately, the photographer, as many of you already know, was MAHMOUD RASLAN, a criminal embedded with Nour al-Din Zinki in East Aleppo. Nour al-Din Zinki are funded and armed by the United States as moderate extremists. Nour al-Din Zinki beheaded a 12-year-old Palestinian child, Abdullah Issa, in July 2016. His death, needless to say, did not receive the same attention or elicit equivalent outrage because Nour al-Din Zinki are in the hero category for Western media, the untouchable, US-funded rebels. In the last few days, Omran's father, Mohammed Daknish, has chosen to come forward. Having resisted calls to speak to Syrian media for months, he was so enraged by the ongoing manipulation of his son's image to demonize the Syrian government, he decided to speak to local media. And these were the main points that came out of that interview that was conducted not only by Syrian media, but also by a very close friend and colleague of mine, another independent journalist, Ava Bartlett. And these were the facts that were very clearly omitted from mainstream media reporting on Omran's incident. Omran's father has claimed consistently that there were no planes in the air on the night of the attack. I was told by Khaled Iskaf, another independent journalist living and working inside Aleppo, that for months he had been speaking to Omran's father, and for months Omran's father had said there were no planes in the air that night. He actually suspects that it was the terrorist and extremist factions themselves that attacked his neighborhood purely because they were loyal to the Syrian government. Omran was actually only lightly injured. He'd been taken by the terrorist groups to be photographed while his father was busy searching for his family among the rubble of the attack. Omran's older brother, Ali, was actually killed in that attack. The Daknish family, as I mentioned, were loyal Syrian government supporters. Again, a fact that has never been picked up on or highlighted by the mainstream media. When Aleppo was liberated in December 2016, the family went to West Aleppo, to the Syrian government-held side of Aleppo, for refuge. Bribes were offered by ALKADER sympathetic journalist Musa Omar and by suspected CIA operative and extremist journalist Bilal Abdul Karim of $8,000 for him to allow his son to be used to demonize the Syrian government. By the way, Bilal Abdul Karim, you may well know, has also regularly appeared on Channel 4 and on BBC reports. Omran's father has been threatened by extremist factions, and this is one of the reasons that he had previously refused to come forward, so as to avoid putting his family at greater risk. Another child had been chosen for the photo shoot, but when RASLAN spotted Omran, who was smaller and cuter, the first child was replaced. Cynical use or abuse of a child for propaganda. This is Omran today, and images taken by local journalist Khaled Iskaf show him to be a cheerful little boy, actually enjoying life with his family in his home in Syrian government-protected Aleppo. Now, at this point, one would expect that the MSM would want to further investigate the story and to find out the truth behind the iconic photo that threatened to take us to war. A challenge has in fact been put to Christiane Amanpour to go to Aleppo of CNN and to meet the little boy that she used as a propaganda tool to further demonize the Syrian government, the villain, and to portray the hero, Al-Qaeda, as the victim. So far, for some inexplicable reason, she's not responded. But of course, because this story does not amplify the villain narrative, i.e. Assad didn't do it, the media have gone into default mode, which is into copy-paste journalism and damage limitation. The Telegraph and Guardian, as you can see here, almost mirroring each other in choice of headline, still maintaining the face of suffering narrative, despite the very real evidence to the contrary. Also, naturally, anything that does not vilify the Syrian government can only be possible if the testimony is forced, if the witnesses are coerced. Only if the heroes speak out, only if Al-Qaeda make a statement, is it taken at face value with no questions. I witnessed this myself in East Aleppo during the liberation in December 2016, when I was interviewing civilians emerging from an almost 5-year extremist Nusra Front-led occupation of their neighborhoods and districts. I was told by Alex Thompson of Channel 4 that of course they would say that, dear, it's a war zone, and they will say whatever keeps them safe. This callous dismissal of the very real suffering of these people and their desire to express that suffering was not only astounding, but it was reprehensible from a journalistic standpoint. To dismiss the first-hand evidence from on the ground when sat in an office in London is not acceptable. And then, of course, we have CNN distorting the story to reinstate the villain, because, of course, the government is known to keep a tight control on information within the country. Let's not mention the NSA. And finally, the dear old BBC, the mainstay of media distortion, the imprinting of doubt. The Daknish family reportedly chose to cross into government-controlled territory. Well, they did cross into government-controlled territory. There's actually no doubt about that. They're living there. Misdirection. This comes onto something which we actually witnessed ourselves, Patrick Henningsen and myself. We arrived 1 hour after the Rashdin massacre in Aleppo on April the 15th. The focus was not on the child victims, nor was it on the background to the evacuation of the people of Frome, who had been consummately ignored by mainstream media during their 5-year siege by NATO and Gulf state armed and funded NUSRA Front and al-Sham, during which time these people had been subjected to starvation, they'd been deprived of humanitarian aid, and shelled or sniped on a daily basis, threatened with ethnic cleansing. No connection was made, or a very summary one, to the burning of the buses by the same extremist factions as those in Rashdin in December 2016, the buses that had gone to evacuate these civilians in another Syrian government negotiation exchange deal. No mention was made of the threats of attacking these people if they were evacuated. Instead, almost universally, the media focus was on this man, photographed on his knees among the carnage, another iconic image. Aboud ALKADER HABAK, who was shot to fame by Channel 4, who exclusively based their coverage of this tragedy on the interview with Habak, as did many others. And again, this iconic image went viral. This man became a media hero. Despite the fact that this was clearly a dreadful sectarian attack by NATO and Gulf state extremists, again, one of the minority communities inside Syria, the media had to maintain its villain versus heroes narrative, and the BBC went into instant defend the heroes mode, declaring that their heroes, the rebels, had no motive for carrying out this attack. In fact, Channel 4 ran this report despite the fact that Habak even stated during the interview that he had been distributing the chips to the children. What was clear from speaking to the survivors and distraught mothers who had been locked on the buses while events were being filmed, and who told us universally that the whole event had been staged and planned in advance, was that the chips had been offered as a lure to entice the starving and deprive children off the buses and to lead them to their deaths. Why, when Habak made this statement, did Channel 4 not question him? Why did he take center stage over the mangled corpses and dying children? Because he's the hero, and the dead and dying children were demoted to the villains by a media really warped by its desire to maintain the regime change narrative at all costs. I apologize in advance for this image. I couldn't show you the video because it's seriously distressing, but it's important for you to see it. What Channel 4 also omitted to show while focusing on the heroism of Habak is that Habak and his comrades was in fact piling those bodies of the dead and dying children into the waiting trucks, having locked the mothers inside the buses, preventing them reaching their terrified, dying, and traumatized children. Injured children thrown on top of the dead bodies of their friends and siblings before being taken not to Aleppo that was 15 minutes away, but to Turkey, while their mothers watched their abduction from behind the windows of the buses. While some of those children have been returned to their families, thanks to international pressure, largely from Russia and Iran, 25 of those children are still missing and unaccounted for. HABAK has known allegiances to extremist groups such as al-Sham and Nusra Front, who were operating in Rashdin that day. HABAK was also conveniently filmed during the alleged chemical weapon attacks in Khan Shahun, before he relocated to Rashdin to yet again take center stage. But none of this, of course, is investigated by mainstream media because his personality as a hero has to be maintained. And as if I could forget the Superman, the ultimate Superman of the Syrian conflict, the White Helmets. While Western media was claiming that the White Helmets were saving children during the attack in Rashdin, mothers with their children still missing were telling me that after the blast, the mothers were allowed out for around 10 minutes in order to be filmed being saved by the White Helmets and their associates. And in fact, one mother actually said to me it was as if they were making a movie before they were forced back onto the buses at gunpoint to watch the mass abduction of their children by the extremist factions and the White Helmets. Another one of the drivers told me they didn't save the children, they only saved the fighters, Nusra Front and al-Sham. Present at Rashdin was another well-known White Helmet, Muawiyah Aga Hassan, already renowned for his execution selfie, shown below, taken during the public torture and execution of 2 Syrian Arab army prisoners of war in Khan Tuman. On his own social media account, just prior to the arrival of the evacuees from Kafr and Fua, he posted that he was waiting for the arrival of the infidels. As if the suffering of these children were not enough, the Telegraph dismissed children as government supporters. Children under the age of 10 are described as government supporters. So under the hero versus villain construct, their lives are worth less because of their affiliation with the arch-villain in this narrative. They're children. CNN went one step further and described this crime against humanity as a mere hiccup. So now we come to probably one of the greatest distortions of the Syrian conflict. The untouchable White Helmets, who have probably received more awards than most Hollywood actors could even dream of, including, of course, their recent Oscar for the Netflix documentary showcasing their heroic exploits in Syria. When we were in East Aleppo, we visited the abandoned White Helmet centers in SAKHOUR, Hanano, Marje, and Bab al-NAYRAB. These were the main centers used by the White Helmets. The evidence we collated further exposes the White Helmets as not just an Al-Qaeda affiliate, but potentially as Al-Qaeda itself, donning the White Helmet as camouflage for the many atrocities carried out by Nusra Front and the 50 brigades of NATO and Gulf state-supported extremists embedded in East Aleppo from 2012 to 2016. Probably the clearest and most distinct demonstration of the Al-Qaeda and the White Helmets working side by side was in Bab al-NAYRAB. This center was a shared center. The storage facilities in the whole street were shared. We spoke to one businessman from the area whose house had been requisitioned by the White Helmets and Nusra Front. He told us they worked side by side. There was no difference between them. As you enter the courtyard, which you can see photographed here, you go through a corridor. On one side was written, fraudulently of course, the Syria Civil Defense, and on the right-hand side, Nusra Front. That name, as you know, quite possibly, was stolen from the real Syria Civil Defense, working in the most heavily populated areas of Syria, containing 80% of the Syrian population, established in 1953 in Syria. Please note also the door on the left-hand side in the courtyard, and then listen to this young boy who was with us, telling us what it was used for.
هون كان سجل لهم.
Here it was a prison for
ويعذبوا الناس فيهم.
And they used to torture people here.
هدول جبهة النصرة وبعض
Nusra fronts and the white helmets.
Used to bring people here to torture them.
كانوا يجيبوا الناس يعذبوهم هون.
إيه كانوا يعذبوهم.
Yes.
So the white helmets and Nusra front were
يعني كانوا النصرة وقبعات بدأوا يشتغلوا مع بعض.
إيه كانوا يشتغلوا مع بعض.
Does he know people that were brought here?
كان تعرف شي ناس جابوهم هون عذبوهم؟
إيه في كتير وكمان في واحد قرايبنا.
One of his relatives
كمان اجوا عذبوه.
They tortured him. وعاش.
نعم. إيه وعاش معهم. شي جمعة.
He survived. Yeah, they tortured him for a week.
What does he think of the white helmets?
شو رأيك بالقبعات البيضاء؟
منا كويسين وبيسرقوا كتير.
They're not good and they used to steal a lot.
And they worked with.
وبيتحركشوا في الناس.
وكانوا يشتغلوا مع مين؟
مع جبهة النصر.
And they worked with the Nusra Front. شكرا.
His was not the only testimony. Virtually everybody we spoke to confirmed what he said. In SAKHOUR, which was probably one of the biggest White Helmet centers, we saw school buildings occupied by Nusra Front and the White Helmets, all in the same compound, with walkways from Nusra Front to the White Helmets center that featured an Al Jazeera hero special, Again, clear evidence externally and internally of the White Helmet affiliations to Nusra Front, the Nusra flag in the basement and the Nusra Front logo on the wall of the center alongside the White Helmet posters.
All these buildings were used by terrorists.
Yeah.
All elements.
This is just to show you the proximity of the buildings that were occupied by Nusra Front. This is one of them. Of the 500 schools in East Aleppo, 300 were occupied by Nusra Front. So this was the White Helmet Center, and then just spinning around, basically that's the other Nusra Front Center. The reason they took over schools was very obvious. One, they were big buildings with a lot of facilities and a lot of ground, but also, of course, under international law, they are protected buildings. So quite possible for them to do as they did, to claim that the Syrian and Russian air forces were bombing schools. In Marjeh, the same thing. Again, very clear evidence that the White Helmets sharing the building with one of the first extremist brigades to invade East Aleppo, Al-Tawid Brigade, that later morphed into the Nusra Front or splintered into one of the 50 other extremist brigades in East Aleppo. Under the time constraints for this presentation, I'm only showing a small percentage of the documentation and evidence we discovered during our time in East Aleppo. But one element that I want to really focus on, because I think it's very important. One of the White Helmet leaders, or in fact one of the originators of the White Helmets actually in East Aleppo, not as the White Helmets as an entire concept, but in East Aleppo, was Abdulaziz Maghrabi, known as Abu Salma. In 2012, Maghrabi was actually a fighter with Al-Tawid Brigade. As I just explained, they were the first of the extremist factions to enter East Aleppo. Maghrabi really demonstrates the blurring of the lines between villain and hero by our media. As I said, he was a self-confessed fighter with Al-Tawid Brigade. He's actually appeared in an article where he talks about his time as a member of that group. They were also a NATO and Gulf state armed and funded extremist group. According to testimony from an ex-terrorist still in East Aleppo, protected by the Syrian government Amnesty and Reconciliation Agreement, Maghrabi then went on to be a leader of Nusra Front. While still with Nusra Front, he set up the East Aleppo Council that also comprised Nour al-Dinzinki members, the child beheaders. And he was elected as the head of the Aleppo Council, as is shown there in their actual official announcement, in December 2013. Maghrabi then went on to establish the White Helmets in East Aleppo while still a Nusra Front leader. Among the paperwork that was found in East Aleppo was clear documentary evidence among the archives abandoned by the White Helmets and Nusra Front of US and UK funding of the East Aleppo Council. On the left is a grant agreement from Comonix, the USAID outreach agent, to the East Aleppo Council under the Syria Regional Program of $21,086, dated September 2014. In that actual agreement, they go on to talk about raising more money for equipment for the civil defense of the East Aleppo Council. On the right is a letter in Arabic from the East Aleppo Council congratulating Sadiq Khan on his election as Mayor of London and thanking the civilians of London for sending equipment and support to the White Helmets. So the funding stream is very clear. We found the documentary evidence to support our research and analysis and to identify at least one of the funding streams into the extremist factions inside East Aleppo, disguised by corporate media as heroes, while the real villains, those funding, arming, and equipping the torturers, rapists, murderers, thieves, and ethnic cleansing of East Aleppo and Syria, go unmentioned by the media that is serving as their facilitators and enablers. I mentioned that this is only the tip of the iceberg, and I've been working on further identifying the actual organizations affiliated to the UK government that were funding the various organizations, primarily the White Helmets in East Aleppo. And also not forgetting that the UK government, via its secret, according to Amber Rudd, Conflict Stability and Security Fund, has given up to 65 million to the White Helmets in non-humanitarian aid. The entire mainstream media narrative on Syria has almost universally been effectively fake news through omission, distortion, misdirection, exclusion, with very little diverging opinion or deviation from the regime change narrative. Those genuinely fighting terrorism, the Syrian government, the Syrian army, Russia, and Iran, are deemed the villains, while the terrorists, disguised as rebels or freedom fighters, are portrayed as the heroes, with the ultimate accolades going to the White Helmets. The White Helmets are a primarily UK shadow state construct participating in some of the greatest crimes against humanity ever witnessed in history and producing the majority of the propaganda that is maintaining the Syrian conflict under a pseudo-humanitarian pretext. Those funding and arming the terrorists and prolonging the suffering of the Syrian people via media, economic, and militant terrorism actually walk away scot-free because the media has given them a get-out-of-jail-free card thanks to their reporting of events and lack of any real investigative on-the-ground journalism. Their sources are the real villains that become heroes because the TV tells you they are. As Dr. Nafiz Ahmed said, yeah, there is a giant elephant in the room. The fact that the crisis of fake news began inside traditional media. In fact, the most egregious cases of fake news have been promulgated by traditional media institutions. And it is precisely the mass disillusionment and breakdown of trust with traditional media institutions that has been the biggest driver of all. News consumers are fed up with being lied to. They no longer have any trust in the ability of prevailing media institutions to tell the truth. And in writing this presentation, it sank in yet further to me the extent to which corporate media has abused the children of Syria. They have not only exploited them as propaganda to promote war that will inevitably kill more children, but thanks to corporate media platforming, promoting, and iconizing terrorism in all its forms, children have been forced to witness the most hideous crimes. We spoke to children in East Aleppo, and at the end of the conversation, they casually told us they had witnessed crucifixion. They'd witnessed people being locked in holes in the ground, people being whipped, people being summarily executed. Children have been starved, they've been sniped and shelled. They've lost limbs, they've lost mothers, they've lost fathers, they've lost a childhood because our media is intent on portraying the villains as heroes. Thank you.